Hello everyone, this is the Bovine Terror, and today we are going to be talking about Empires of the Undergrowth. Now, today is going to be a little bit different of an episode. What I'm going to be doing is I am actually going to be doing some calculations and some theory crafting, I suppose, and talking a little bit about some aspects of Empires of the Undergrowth. Today, specifically, we are going to be talking about leafcutter ant majors. Now, the reason that I want to talk about them is because there has been an age-old question of which is better, the leafcutter ant major taunts or the stuns. And today, I think I have actually found a pretty definitive answer as to which one is better, at least most of the time. There are always going to be situations where one's better than the other, but I think in general, I think I've answered that question, so we're going to be talking about that. But before we can start talking about that, the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what the differences between the two majors are. If you played the game, you probably know generally what they are, but you might not know all the breakdowns of all their stats. So what I have here is we're on the Empires of the Undergrowth wiki, where they take the stats from the developers' spreadsheet that they post publicly to everybody to look at, and they just compile all the information here in a nicer to read way. So most of the stats we don't really need to worry about because they don't matter a tremendous amount. But just to go over some basics, just so you kind of understand where I'm at. Leafcutter ant majors, they have a lot of health, is kind of their big thing. They're very, very tanky, and that's kind of their role in the game, is they play tanks. And the two special abilities that they have from the two different ones, the taunts and the stuns, are both tanking abilities. They're both abilities that help reduce damage to the entire team of ants. So, because they are tanky, what I wanted to do is I wanted to try to figure out which major, stuns or taunts, are better at absorbing damage. Which ones can take more damage than another, to help compare and see which major is better than the other. So, just so we know, they have a lot of health. The regeneration speed is pretty good. This is how much health they regenerate per second. 0.2, most ants is all 0.1 at every level. And then I think the best ants are 0.3 at level 3, but this is like the medium amount of regeneration, so they're pretty good. But regeneration is very, very slow. Like, they only regenerate 0.2 health per second. So if you have like 200 or 400 health, regenerating 0.2 health a second is very, very slow. So it takes them a long time to regenerate health. So just want to keep that in mind while we're doing this. Also, their DPS at first and second level, it's pretty high. It's pretty decent. And then especially once they get to third level, their DPS is really high. Like 22 DPS is one of the highest DPSs of any of the ants in the game. So also important to know that they do a lot of damage as well as being good tanks. So then we get to this. This is the big chart that we're going to be looking at and referencing throughout our time in this video. So we'll look at the taunts first, and then we'll look at the stuns. So the taunts. So in order to activate their taunt, they have a random percent chance. They have a 30% chance of activating it. I'm assuming this means each second there is a 30% chance of them activating their taunt if their taunt is not on cooldown. That is what I'm assuming this means. It might mean something different, but that's what I'm assuming it means. So their activation chance for the taunt is 30%. The attack does 1 damage, so it's not a lot, but it does a little bit of damage. It has a cooldown of 10 seconds. The radius gets a little bit bigger as time goes on. That way they can taunt more enemies as they level up. When they taunt, they gain regeneration. So this means that they heal a little bit. So at level 1, they heal 20 health. At level 2, they heal 25 health. And at level 3, they heal 30 health. So they heal. It's not a lot of healing, but they do heal a little bit. And then this is the duration. So at level 1, they heal for 4 seconds. At level 2, for 5. And level 3, for 6. Basically what this means is that no matter what level they're at, they regenerate health at 5 health per second for whatever the duration is. So at level 3, they heal the most health, but at any level, they heal the same health per second. So that's another thing to keep in mind while we're doing this. The taunt also lasts exactly the same amount of time that the duration lasts. So then they have, at level 3, they have a special thing that gives them a really, really high physical and venom resistance. So it's triggered when it gets to 40% health. So this particular ability is not on a cooldown. It only triggers once they reach 40% health. As far as I understand, it seems to only trigger when they go from like a higher amount of health to 40% health. It doesn't seem, as far as I can tell, it doesn't trigger if you go from like 39% health to 40% health. It doesn't seem to work like that way. I don't know for sure, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't work like that. So when that happens, they gain an 80% resistance buff, which means that no matter what damage they're taking, they're reducing it by 80%. So that's really nice. It's a really good tanking ability, attracting all of the damage to you and then using your resistance to give yourself, just to negate a whole lot of damage. It's very, very nice. And then that buff duration only lasts 4 seconds. It's a little interesting because the buff duration lasts 4 seconds, but the taunt lasts longer. I guess technically, and they don't technically trigger at the same time all the time, but it's kind of interesting that it's like that. But yeah, anyway, so that's the taunts. And then the stuns are a little bit different. So they have an activation chance 50%. So it's a little higher than the activation chance of the taunts. Just a good thing to know. The attack damage is 1. It's the same as the taunt. And then their cooldown is shorter than the taunts. The taunts have 10 seconds every single time, no matter what level they are. And the stun cooldown gets shorter as they grow in level. So at level 1, it's an 8-second cooldown. At level 2, it's a 7-second cooldown. And at level 3, it's a 6-second cooldown. And then at level 3, they get their stun can now stun multiple enemies. So they can stun enemies in like this 40 radius. I will also say I don't know what the units for the radius of effects are for these. I'm not sure. Basically, typically though, when this happens, they stun like a little. They seem to stun like most of the enemies in front of them when they're fighting. That seems to be pretty typically what they do. And then they have a special thing that does a movement speed debuff, only at level 3. So after they taunt, so when they stun, they also get this. The enemies also get a movement speed debuff, and this lasts for 8 seconds. I'm pretty sure this duration is 8 seconds. From the beginning of the stun. So they're stunned for 4 of these seconds, and then they have the slowdown for 4 more seconds after that, I think. I'm not totally sure on that. It's a little hard to test this sometimes because they're melee, and this is only a movement speed debuff, and so it's kind of hard to see how fast they are when they do this debuff, because if they're attacking an enemy, they're probably fighting in melee, and they're not going to move anyway. So I'm not totally sure on that, but I think that's how that works. And then their stun duration increases as they level up. So at level 1, it's only 3 seconds. At level 2, it's 3.5 seconds. And at level 3, it's 4 seconds. So yeah, now we kind of have an idea of what all the stats are for the 2 tanking abilities. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to this chart. So I have a big spreadsheet. We're just going to be going through step by step to look at how good these 2 majors are. So what I've done in all of the columns that I have here, I have whatever thing we are measuring for up here. And then I have taunts at level 1, stuns at level 1, taunts at level 2, stuns at level 2, taunts at level 3, and stuns at level 3. So they're all compared like this. You can always just go taunt, stun, taunt, stun, taunt, stun at each level to see what they do. So just to get a baseline of how their abilities worked, I decided that I would see how much damage they negated in one use of their ability at 10 damage a second for 6 seconds, totaling out to 60 damage. So for the taunts at level 1, they negate 20 damage. The reason they negate 20 damage is because they heal 20 damage essentially, and it's over the course of 4 seconds. So they're essentially negating 20 damage because if they could take 20 damage and then they heal 20 damage, essentially reducing the damage they take by 20. So that's what that is. The stuns at level 1, they would block 30 damage. Reason for this is because since they're taking 10 damage a second and their stun at level 1 lasts for 3 seconds, they are blocking 10 DPS times 3 is 30 damage. So they're blocking 30 damage with their stun. So already off the bat at the first level, the stuns are blocking more than the taunts. So good to know. All right, then at level 2, the taunts do 25 damage. because they are now, their total regeneration is 25 at level 2, and so they are going to end up healing 25 damage, regardless of how much damage they're taking. Then the stuns, their stun now lasts 3.5 seconds, so they do 3.5 times 10 is 35, so they block 35 damage. So at level 2, the stuns are also ahead of the taunts. Good to know. Then we get to level 3. So now the taunts gain their resistance ability. So now they gain the regeneration, which is 30, so they automatically gain 30 points to this, or they automatically reduce 30 points of damage. And then I'm assuming in this example that they are using their resistance ability as well to maximize the amount of damage that these taunts are doing in our calculations. So the taunt would then reduce that 10 DPS by 80% for 4 seconds. And so that comes out to be 32. So we do 32 plus the 30 that they healed, comes out to 62. So they've blocked 62 damage. It's a big jump up from the taunts at level 2. They block way, way more damage. And then at level 3, they stun for 4 seconds, so they block 4 times 10 DPS, so they block 40 damage. So then we see that there's a reversal. The taunts are actually blocking more damage than the stuns at level 3. So cool, that's a good example. Because the stuns are dependent on how much damage they're taking, I wanted to see what happens if they took a different amount of damage. So this one is the damage negated in one use of the ability at 100 DPS for 6 seconds. So this is a total of 600 damage. So you're probably not going to be taking 100 DPS from one target or anything like that, but you could be taking it from multiple targets at once. So that's what we're measuring right here. So if it's at 100 DPS, then at level 1, the taunts would block 20 damage because, again, their damage reduction ability is just flat healing, so it doesn't actually matter how much damage they are taking. That's just all the damage they prevent. Now, the stun with one ability, they are going to block 300 damage. That's a lot of damage. So they're blocking a lot of damage from all this that they're taking. So this is a huge jump up from the last one. Same thing with the taunts level 2. It doesn't matter how much damage they're taking. They're still only going to block the 25 damage that they heal. Same with this. Now we're just the stuns. Again, it's based on the damage they're taking. So they're taking 100. They're reducing the damage by 100 each second. So because this is 3.5 seconds, they reduce it by 350 damage. So again, a lot. Then we get to the taunts. And so what we do here is, now that the taunts have the resistance ability, how much damage they block is dependent on how much damage they're taking, at least in part. So basically you would do so what you do for this is you do 100 DPS, multiply it by 80%. So I would do 400 times 0.8. That gives me my value, which would be, it's 320 is the damage blocked from the resistance ability. And then because of their taunt, they heal an additional 30 damage. So you add 30 to that, and we come up with 350. Then we look at our stun, again blocking 400 damage. They'll be blocking 400 damage because they negate all damage for 4 seconds, and they're taking 100 damage per second, so they reduce it by 400. So now we see that there's a reversal. Now we see that the stuns at all levels, including level 3, are now blocking more than the taunts. And we also see there's a huge spike in how much damage the stuns can block because we're taking so much more damage. So this is important to know. It's important to note that the taunts at level 1 and 2, it doesn't matter how much damage they take. They're always going to do this much with one use of their ability. It's always going to be 20 health and 25 health no matter what. Depending on how much damage you take, though, for the stuns at all levels and the taunts at level 3, that will increase. So this is something important to know. So now that I saw this, I was like, okay, so I guess I'm probably more interested in the level 3 taunt and stuns because they have these extra special abilities. I know some people typically don't level up any leafcutter ants because in the leafcutter levels, it's often better to just have more ants than it is to have stronger ones. So maybe you wouldn't want to upgrade your majors, but I feel like at least in the Formicarium challenges, it is very useful to talk about the level 3 majors. So I think that's kind of what I will focus on. So what I decided is that I wanted to see what value the level 3 stun and taunt meet up, and where they block exactly the same damage with one use of their ability. Because in the first example that we looked at, the stuns blocked less than the taunts, and in the second one, the stuns blocked more than the taunts. So I want to see where those two intersect. So where they intersect is the level 3 stun and taunts are equal at 37.5 DPS over 6 seconds at level 3. Something I may have forgotten to mention. The reason why I chose 6 seconds is because that is the maximum duration of the taunts at level 3. And that one is the longest duration of time that they're blocking damage. So I figured I would let that level 3 taunt have as much time as possible to block that. It does mean that numerically it's making the stuns a little bit weaker, but I think it's fair still, because in-game they're blocking more damage for more period of time. So I think it's a fair way to measure this. So, and then just to show how I got to 37.5, if you look at 37 DPS, the taunts will block just slightly more than the stuns, and at 38 DPS, the taunts block slightly less than the stuns. And right at 37.5 DPS, the taunts block 150 damage, and so do the stuns. So I saw this and I was like, okay, cool. So this is the cutoff. If the DPS that a major is taking is less than 37.5 DPS, then taunts are better. But if the damage is greater than 37.5 DPS, then the stuns are better. Cool. Answer, pretty much answered, right? Well, not exactly. And we'll go over why this maybe isn't quite accurate in all ways. But first, I gotta address something that I think a lot of you are probably thinking right now. And that is that all of these damage calculations that I'm doing are calculated as though the damage is coming from one source. So one creature is doing all this damage. And this could not be a fair assessment, because the stuns at level 1 and 2 can only stun one creature. Which means that the taunts would be better fighting multiple weak enemies. So, you could be taking 100 DPS, but there's not, as far as I know, there's not a single creature in the game that can do 100 DPS. So that calculation would have to be from multiple sources. And then the stuns could only block one of them. So a stun couldn't physically block 100 DPS, no matter what, right? So maybe it's not really a fair assessment in that regard. My argument to this, though, is that I don't think that really matters that much, and this is why. For one, the level 3 stuns can stun multiple creatures, so I don't really think the issue is relevant to them, because, well, they can stun multiple creatures. If there are multiple creatures all dealing that combined damage, the stuns often can stun all or most of the creatures that are trying to attack them, so they will still be able to reduce this damage most of the time. This is an issue for the level 1 and 2 stuns, though, because they can't do it to multiple enemies. They can only stun one enemy. Though, I will say that I don't think it matters that much, because with the taunts at level 1 and 2, they always block the same amount of damage, no matter how much damage they're taking. Because in this argument, the only time that the taunts are going to be more effective than the stuns at lower levels, or at like levels 1 and 2, is if the stuns are stunning one creature that is doing less than around 5 DPS. There's not a lot of instances in which a single major is battling multiple really weak enemies, because the vast majority of non-ant enemies do more than 5 damage a second, or they do quite a bit more than 5 damage a second. And so it's rare for a single major to be in combat with a bunch of weak ants for a prolonged period of time, because mages do a lot of damage. Like, I wanted us to be aware of that when we're looking at their stats, because they do a lot of DPS. So they're gonna kill all the other weak ants pretty quickly if they're so weak that they're only doing like around 5 DPS. Like, just as a metric, black ants at level 3, this is a fully upgraded black ant, only does 7 DPS. So that's one ant. So if you're having a bunch of really weak ants, like maybe like big-headed ant miners, or like low-level black ants or something like that, or low-level slave makers, like, yeah, I guess they could all be ganging up on a major, but the major does so much damage that the major's probably going to kill them all really quickly anyway, so they're not going to be blocking that much damage anyway, which to me kind of makes the point that the taunts can handle multiple enemies at level 1 and 2 better than stuns. It kind of makes that idea moot, because even if the stuns aren't as good as it, they're gonna kill the ants really quickly anyway, so it doesn't particularly matter. So yeah, I just wanted to address that, and I wanted to talk about why I don't think it matters that much, and why all of my calculations of future are going to be made assuming that the damage is coming from one source, and if it's not coming from one source, then the numbers might be a little bit off. But the primary thing to keep in mind is that for the level 3 taunts and stuns, it doesn't matter, because the stuns can stun multiple enemies, so they already get an ability that makes them good at dealing with multiple enemies anyway, and they can reduce damage from multiple attackers. So yeah, I just wanted to preface that. Just want to let people know that we will be looking at those. That is how I will be doing this from now on. So, problem solved, right? Like, now we can say that, you know, at low levels of damage, at low like DPSs, taunts are better, and at least at level 3, and at high DPSs, stuns are better. Yes, but there is one issue with that, is that these ants don't get to use those abilities once per life. They can taunt and stun multiple times because they have cooldowns, so they can keep doing that. What about not just one instance? What happens if they get multiple uses of their abilities? Then who's blocking more damage? So, I have made some more charts to do that. But if we're going to be talking about those charts, we have to mention something that makes this much more complicated. So I started making this video before the Fire Ant update. And since the Fire Ant update and the Adventure update, because I'm recording this just after the Adventure update came out, they've added something on the wiki that wasn't there before, and this was the activation % chance. I don't know if this was in the game before and they just didn't show that stat was there, or if this was a nerf. But now, in the past when I was calculating this, I was going, okay, they have the activation time plus their cooldown, and then they can, once I add those two values together, then they can do their ability a second time. But now that they have this activation chance, it was like, oh, now I need to do statistics to figure out what the chance is that their thing will activate in a certain amount of time. So what I ended up doing, this isn't perfect, but what I think the best way, in my opinion, that this works is I decided I would do this pretty conservatively. So what I said was, I'm going to figure out the probability that their taunt or their stun will activate within a certain time frame, and I set the probability to anything higher than 90%. Then that would be my estimate of how much extra time it would take for the stuns or the taunts to activate their abilities, given this % activation chance. So what I calculated to is, with the taunts, with a 30% activation chance, after their cooldown is down, it is going to be within 7 seconds. You have over a 90% chance to get at least one activation of your taunt to happen. So what I did was to make so essentially now their cooldown is 10 to 17 seconds for all levels. 10 seconds is their base cooldown, and then plus the extra 7 seconds to account for the % chance that it'll activate. For the stuns, since their activation chance is higher, they only needed 4 extra seconds. So their cooldowns, since their cooldowns are different for each level, it's now between 8 and 12 seconds for first level, 7 and 11 seconds for second level, and 6 to 10 seconds for third level. So when I do my calculation, I'm going to be using these values in mind. I'm going to be using the higher value. So for the taunts at all levels, I'm going to say the time it takes for them to get to their second ability is going to be they do their ability. So at level 1, they taunt for 4 seconds. At level 2, they taunt for 5 seconds. And at level 3, they taunt for 6 seconds. Then their cooldown begins. And their cooldown will essentially be 17 seconds. It might be higher, it might be lower. It's just because it's a percent chance. This is just, I thought, was the most likely thing. So I added an extra 7 seconds to that. So in total, for level 1, their cooldown, they're from when they start their taunt to the beginning of their second taunt, it is 4 seconds plus 17 seconds, and that totals to 21 seconds. Level 2, it's 22 seconds, and at level 3, it's 23 seconds. So, just so you know how that one works. The stun cooldown, there is kind of the same story. So for level 1, they stun for 3 seconds, and then they have a cooldown for 12 seconds. So they're from the beginning of their first stun to the beginning of their second stun, it is 15 seconds. For the second level, it is 14 and a half seconds. And for the third level, it's 14 seconds. So now that we have that established, now we can go on to our calculations. The damage negated over 20 seconds at 37.5 DPS. I'm using that 37.5 DPS. The stuns at level 3 and the taunts at level 3 both negated the same amount of damage, 150, with one use of their abilities. So now I'm seeing what happens over the course of 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is not enough time for any of the taunts to get their abilities off a second time. The stuns, however, can get their abilities off twice. This is really important to note because this means that in 20 seconds, the stuns will be able to get their abilities off a whole second extra time, and the taunts just won't be able to. And that is a big advantage for the stuns because their cooldown is shorter. So let's take a look at how much damage they're negating. So once again, the taunts at level 1 only block 20 damage. The stuns, because they get 2 full uses of this, blocking at 37.5 DPS, they're going to block 225 damage. At level 2, the taunts, again, only block 25 damage, and the stuns block 262.5 damage, because, again, they get 2 full uses of this. Then we get up to our taunts at level 3. They have a huge spike in damage reduction to 150 damage blocked with their 1 use. And then the stuns, because they get 2 uses, they block 300 damage. They block double the amount of damage that they did with only 1 use, which makes sense. So we can see now that once you get a little bit of time going for the stuns, they start to block a lot more damage, and that's kind of a problem. Like, you can even see, just in 20 seconds, a level 1 stun will block more damage than a level 3 taunt. And that's important to note. I think it's important to notice that this is the case. So now let's increase the time. Let's increase it to 30 seconds. Now, this timing is more in favor of the taunts, because it fully gives all of them 2 full uses of their ability, and it limits how much of a third use of the stuns ability they can get. It doesn't stop it, but it does limit it. So now they get 2 full uses. At level 1, they're going to block 40 damage, because they're getting to heal 20 health twice. It's still not a lot of damage. Like, that's not great with 2 full uses, and this took 30 seconds, and they only blocked 40 damage in that 30 seconds. It's not really that good. The stuns, on the other hand, they get their 2 full uses. They don't get a third one. If they had 1 more second, they could start their next use, but they don't, so they only get 2 uses. But they still blocked 225 damage. It's still a lot of damage. It's way more than the taunt. Then, the taunt at level 2, they get 2 full uses, so they get 50 damage reduction. Still not a lot over 30 seconds. Still quite low. Then, we get to the stun. The stuns now get to do 300 damage reduction. And the reason for this is because they get 2 full uses of their ability, and because of how short their cooldown is, they get to do 1 second of their third use. So they don't get the full use of it, but they get 1 second of it. So they have 300 damage reduction. Then we get the taunts at level 3, and they have 2 full uses, but they're only blocking 180 damage. And if you notice, that's only 30 more damage than the last time they did it. And the reason for this is because taunts get to use their taunt ability multiple times, which is their healing ability, but they don't get to use their damage resistance multiple times. If you use a Taunt Major, you probably will only get to use that ability once. Maybe twice, but probably only once. And if it is twice, you have to get out of combat and heal back up. And remember when we talked about their regeneration speed? At level 3, their regeneration speed is only 0.2 health per second. So if they drop down, if they have 400 health, which at level 3 they do, and you drop their health down to 40%, and then you drop it down to like 35%, and they need to heal all that health back up, that would be, what, 20 health they need to heal back? 20 health is kind of a lot of health that they need to heal back. So there's kind of a good chance they're not going to get to use it again, because it's going to take a really long time to heal that much. So probably only going to get one usage out of that in their lifetime. Especially, and also, if they're taking this damage over a course of 30 seconds, they will only get to use it once because they have no chance to heal again. And at least for now in the game, we don't have a chance that can heal in combat other than the Leafcutter Media, but they only heal 3 health a second, so... or about, I think they might do a little more at level 3, because I think their attack speed increases, but... and that's only in Adventure. They don't do it in any of the other levels. It's only in the extra level Adventure. And 3 health, like around 3 health a second is not really enough to heal them back up above that 40% threshold if they're taking 37.5 DPS. So it's just really likely they're not going to get to use it a second time. Maybe in the future we'll get ants that can heal a lot in combat or out of combat, and then maybe the taunts will get to use their abilities multiple times, but for now, they don't. So it's only 180. Then we get to the stuns at level 3, and they get 2 full uses plus 2 seconds of their third use because their cooldown is shorter than the level 2s. And so they get 2 seconds of the third use, and so they total out 375 damage blocked. So something to note here that's really important. The level 1 stun blocks way more than the level 3 taunt, even though the taunt got 2 full uses of their ability. So keeping that in mind, if we do all the calculations, if a level 1 or higher stun major takes 37.5 DPS for more than 16 seconds, they reduce damage more than a level 3 taunt, and the taunt will never ever catch up. Reason for this is because 1 full stun at level 1 blocks 112.5 damage. And then we do 15 seconds for... after the beginning of their first stun, then they can stun again, and then once they get to second 16, they've now blocked 150 damage, which is exactly the same amount that a level 3 taunt blocked at their first activation. And then at the next second, at second 17, they've now blocked 175.5 damage, which is more than the level 3 taunt, and it's more than the level 3 taunt once they get to 180. Or once they get to their second full use of their taunt ability. That basically means that even at level 1, taunts are going to, as long as they can use their ability twice, which it only takes 16 seconds to get to that point, they're going to be blocking more damage than a taunt at level 3, which is wild. We kind of talked about the resistance ability once per life. Even if their resistance ability was tied to their taunt ability, and they could use the taunt ability and the resistance every single time that they activated taunt, they would still fall behind the level 3 stuns, not behind the level 1 and 2 stuns, but they'd fall behind the level 3 stuns because the level 3 stuns combined use and cooldown of their ability is around 10 seconds. And the taunts are around 23 seconds. So they will never ever catch up. Even if the taunts get really, really lucky, which luck is not on their side with a 30% chance with a 30% activation chance, even if they were really lucky and the stuns still had the 50% chance, and the stuns just weren't very lucky and the stuns got all the way to those extra 4 seconds and the taunts could just use it as soon as they got in, they would still be using their abilities equal to the amount of times that the stuns are using them, because the stuns would get them every 10 seconds and the taunts would use them every 10 seconds. And that's only if they're really, really lucky, and they're not going to be that lucky the vast majority of the time because they only have a 30% chance of activating. So even if the resistance ability was tied to their taunt, which I'm kind of thinking they might need to do, because it feels like going through this math like this, it feels like they're pretty weak. I feel like maybe their resistance ability should be tied to their taunting ability and not tied to their health. I don't know, maybe that's too powerful, but as far as I can tell, I don't think it would be, because the cooldown and the time and the activation chance is so much less, and it's so much less frequent, that over the course of a long prolonged battle, they're just not going to block as much damage as the stuns. So something to think about, maybe. So we've established that at this kind of middling DPS, where it was even damage negation for the taunts and the stuns at level 3, as soon as like 15 to 16 seconds go by, the stuns pass the taunts forever, thanks to their shorter cooldown and the repeated use of their strongest damage negating ability. Because again, the resistance ability is the strongest damage negating ability that taunts have, and they can only use it once. But we do need to keep in mind that we established that the taunts do better at negating damage at lower DPSs than the stuns. So at what DPS threshold do the taunts reduce damage more than the stuns, even despite their longer cooldown and the lack of repeated use of the resistance ability? So we'll have to see that. But before we get into the exact math, because stuns will get to do a full activation and finish their cooldown in about half the time it takes taunts to do the same thing, in order for the taunts to win this, they will need to block more damage with one use of their taunt than the stuns can block with 2 uses of their stuns. If the stuns can activate twice as often, the taunts have to make up for all of that damage reduction in the first use of their ability. They absolutely have to do that. And since the taunts, their damage reduction is based on the DPS, if we just reduce the DPS, then the taunts should catch up eventually, right? So let's see at what level they need to get to before that happens. Let's just reduce the damage a little bit now. So we're starting at 37.5 DPS. Let's reduce it by about half, and let's go to 20 DPS. So we'll do the damage negated over 20 seconds at 20 damage per second, so with a total of 400 damage. So taunts, 20 as usual with 1 full use. Stuns, they will get 2 full uses because it's 20 seconds, and they will do 120 damage reduction. So at level 1, this is still too much damage. We would need to reduce it. At level 2, they get 25. The taunts get 25, and the stuns do 140. Again, we still need to reduce this DPS because the stuns are way better than the taunts right now. Then we get to level 3, and the level 3s are getting 94 damage blocked out of 1 use, and the stuns are getting 160. So still not that close. They close the gap quite a bit, but it's still not there. Like, they still need to block a whole lot more damage before they can get to that point. And just as a extra thing to mention, once again in this example, the stuns at level 1 are blocking more damage than the taunts at level 2 or level 3. And I just wanted to calculate just to help illustrate my point more. If the level 3 taunt gets 1 more use, so that's, an extra, they would need another 10-ish seconds to get through their second use. If they do that, they only block 124 damage, which is only 4 more damage than the level 1 stun. And we're giving an advantage to the taunts again because we're reducing the DPS. We're only at 20 DPS. That's not that high of a damage. That's not that much DPS. I think that's less DPS than a small Leaf Mimic Praying Mantis. The fact that a level 3 taunt can't block as much as a level 3 or level 1 stun, even if it got the extra bonus of its second use, it's not good. You might as well just get a bunch of stuns because it would be cheaper than getting up to a level 3, and they're blocking more damage. And then once you have a bunch of them, for getting 1 level 3 taunt, you could get 3 level 1 stuns. They have less health and they do less DPS, so there'd be other disadvantages. But just in terms of damage negation, now it doesn't matter how many enemies are doing this 20 DPS, which it would, that's not a lot. That's like 3 weak ants, essentially. You could stun all of them, and it wouldn't matter that they're not it wouldn't matter that they can only stun one at a time because they're just negating so much more damage. You can get more of them because you are just negating more damage per ant. So that's just something else to look at. So we'll reduce the DPS further. So now we go to 10 DPS. We'll have it again. Let's see what happens with this one. Again, still 20 with the taunts at level 1. Now it's 60 with the stuns at level 1. Still reducing more than the level 1 taunts. The level 2 taunts, 25, same thing. And the stuns are doing 70. Still a lot more than the taunts. We get up to the level 3 stuns, or the level 3 taunts, and they're blocking 62 damage. A lot better. The stuns are still blocking 80. So this still isn't low enough DPS, but we're closer now, and now on the bright side, the taunts are blocking more damage. The level 3 taunts are blocking more damage than the level 1 stuns. But again, it's a level 1 ant against a level 3 ant, and this one's blocking almost the same damage. Like, and it's at 10 DPS. That's really low. Like, that's really low. Like, most non-ant enemies are dealing more than 10 DPS. So this isn't that good. It's just really not that good. So that's important to recognize. So then we get to this next table, which is the damage negated over 20 seconds at 7 DPS. Now we're going to reduce it to now keep in mind 7 DPS. This is about how much damage a second a single level 3 black ant does. Not a lot of damage. So once again, taunts are 20, stuns are doing 42, still blocking more than the taunts. Then, also, just another thing to keep in mind, since this is 2 full uses of their ability, if we halved this to 40, it would be 21, and it means in 1 use of their ability at 7 DPS, the stuns are still blocking more than level 1 taunts, and 7 DPS is really, really low. So that's even just with 1 activation of their ability. That's not even taking into account the fact that that they get to do this ability twice in the same amount of time that the taunts only get to do it once. So then we get to the level 2 taunts, they're the same thing. The level 3 stuns, 49, still a lot more. And then we get down to our level 3s. So our level 3 taunt now blocks 52.4 damage with 1 use, which is good. Now they're above they are now blocking with 1 use of their ability more than the level 1 stuns with 2 uses of their ability. That's really good. They're still not blocking as much as the stuns at level 3 though, because they get 2 uses of it and they're doing 56 damage reduction. So yeah, you know, not great. You know, we still gotta go lower, I guess. Lower than 7 DPS just to get the taunts to match the stuns. So now we go over to here. Our damage negated over 20 seconds at 6 damage a second. So 20, 36, still level 1, the stuns are winning. Even at 6 DPS. This is less damage than a level 3 black ant. 1 level 3 black ant. This, and then 25 and 42, level 2 are still, the level 2 stuns are still doing better than the taunts. And then we get to the level 3 taunt, which is now doing 49.2, and the stun is doing 48. Hey, we did it! We got to the point where taunts are blocking more damage than stuns. It's at 6 damage a second, which is nothing. It's hardly blocking it's hardly any damage at all. Even over 20 seconds, it's only dealing 120 damage. That's not enough damage to kill a major, even if they weren't reducing damage at any level. So, pretty pitiful damage, but they're winning now. So now let's see what happens if we extend this time frame to 30 seconds. Let's see what happens now. Do the taunts keep up this pace? So now that we're in 30 seconds, we get 2 full uses of the taunt at level 1, and the stuns also get 2 full uses. And now for the first time, since we've been calculating these lower amounts of damage, the taunts are blocking more than the stuns at level 1. So that's pretty cool. It had to get to 30 seconds of taking consistently 6 damage a second, which I don't even know how you do that, because if something's only dealing 6 damage a second, it's probably not very strong, and the ants probably killed it by now. But you know, it's possible at least. So there it is. Maybe you're fighting like a hermit crab or something. I don't know. So then we get to the taunts at level 2 and the stuns at level 2, and the taunts are beating the stuns, even though the stuns are starting to get use of their third use of their stun. I will preface in 1 second, this taunt is going to surpass, or this stun is going to surpass the taunt in damage reduction, because it's going to block 6 more damage next second, and so then it'll be above 50, but, you know, at least at the 30-second mark, the taunts are winning. Then we get to the level 3s. The taunt has now 79.2, and the stuns are 60, and they are getting half. They are doing like 2.5 uses of their stun, and they're still behind. That's pretty good, you know? That kind of means that this is probably the mark where the stuns are really good. It's somewhere between like 6 and 7 DPS is the cutoff point, or is the turnover point, where at less than that amount, the taunts are blocking more damage than the stuns, and at more than that, the stuns are blocking more. So let's now look at the results. So our final results of our mathematical calculations. Taunts are better at DPSs that are less than 7 DPS over prolonged fights. And stuns are better at DPSs greater than 7 DPS over prolonged fights. I'm also paraphrasing here. Technically, that's 7 DPS. It's 6 point something. I just didn't want to calculate that far because it didn't feel necessary. I think 7 DPS kind of lays out my point pretty well. So then, only level 3 taunts. This is specific. Only level 3 taunts are better at DPSs that are less than 37.5 DPS over very short fights. Fights that end in less than 15 seconds. Stuns at all levels are better at DPSs greater than 37.5 DPS over very short fights, less than 15 seconds. Stuns are better at level 1 and level 2 at DPSs that are greater than 7 DPS. And taunts are better at level 1 and level 2 at DPSs less than 7 DPS. So, I mean, technically advantages and disadvantages, but the advantages that the taunts have in these 3 categories, aside from the very short fight one, they're always really good at really, really tiny DPSs. Like, 7 DPS is really, really low. It's pretty easy to fight basically anything that does more than 7 DPS, especially if you're fighting like a group of ants. They're probably going to do more than 7 DPS, and especially if you're using level 3 majors, you're going to be negating multiple ants, and they're almost certainly going to be doing more than 7 DPS combined. So, yeah, there's just not... I mean, at least in that regard, taunts are just way worse. And then if we look at this one, it's like, yeah, the level 3 taunts are technically better at DPSs less than 37.5 DPS, which that's a big range. Like, there's a lot of damages that are pretty useful within that range. Like, I'd probably say anything like, you know, probably like 15 to 37.5 is probably pretty useful damage reduction. But again, this is only over very short fights. It's less than 15 or 16 seconds that they are winning this. As soon as you go over that amount, the stuns are winning at all levels. No matter how high level your taunt is, the stuns are going to be doing better. And like anything greater than 37.5 DPS at any length of time, the stuns are going to be better than the taunts. So I think mathematically, at least, this is kind of proving that stuns are just way, way better tanks and way better at negating damage than taunts. And I think that's pretty clearly shown here. They just block way more damage at, like, levels of damage that are actually meaningful. Like, the ones where they're like, yeah, taunts are better at DPSs less than 7 DPS. It's like, I mean, cool, but, like, that's not that useful. It's just kind of, that's not a lot of damage that you're negating. Like, you're probably going to just kill whatever's dealing that little amount of damage pretty quickly. Probably doesn't matter that much. And like the only redeemable thing I can see about the taunts right now is that they're better at like DPS's less than 37.5 DPS if the fights last less than 15 seconds, which I'd say there's probably quite a few fights that last less than 15 seconds, so that's pretty good, but it's only at level 3, and if it happens to go any higher than that, the stuns are just better. And if the fight does go longer than that, then the taunts are not better. So it's just, yeah, the taunts not very good at reducing damage, at least compared to the stuns in these scenarios. So yeah, I think this pretty mathematically proves that stuns are better than taunts. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of you going, okay, fine, stuns are blocking more damage than taunts, but you're missing one really, really important factor, and that really, really important factor is that there are some creatures that just can't be stunned, which means that the taunts or that the stuns are totally useless at negating damage against certain creatures. And yeah, you're right, that is true. That has always been the argument that I've heard from people as to why taunts are better, is because taunts, you know, I don't think people sat down and did the math, but people were kind of like, yeah, taunts and stuns seem to be both blocking a lot of damage. We don't know exactly how much, but they're blocking a lot of damage, and taunts will always be able to tank against certain creatures, and stuns can't. They're just some creatures the stuns can't tank against. But, so yeah, I thought about that. And let's talk about those results. So I've compiled a list here of every single creature in all of the story levels with Leafcutter Majors that can be stunned and those that cannot. And these are also only levels where you get to choose if you're gonna do a stun or a taunt. And I'm doing story levels specifically because I think those are a little easier to quantify than like free play, and I will talk about free play later, but this is why I've listed them the way that they are, and I haven't listed like every creature in the game. Which, if I listed every creature in the game, these results would be similar, they'd just be bigger lists. So, as you can see, these are all the creatures in all of the story levels that Leafcutter Majors can stun. This is including Formicarium Challenges 3 and 4, and the 3X levels, so 3.1 and 3.2, the Harvest and Frontline. These are all the things that can be stunned. There's 21 of them. These are the things that can't be stunned. There's only 9. So, just right off the bat, like, there's way more things that the stuns can stun than things that cannot be stunned. So, just as a baseline there, like, the argument of, yeah, taunts will always be useful, okay, but stuns will be useful the vast majority of the time, because most of the creatures that they will encounter are stunnable, so they can still do stuff. So, that's the first thing with that. The next part is, a lot of people might say, okay, well, that's fair, but there are some levels where taunts are better, because there's just more enemies that can't be stunned in general than the stun ones. And there will be some levels where the stuns are better, because there's not a lot of enemies that can't be stunned, and so it doesn't matter. Yeah, you're right. Let's look at those, though. So, I've listed, these are all the story levels. These 4 are the story levels. This one is adventure, because it's new and it's a purely Leafcutter level, and you can choose things, and I figured I'd just mention it. And then I also put free play, because we will talk about that. So, for Formicarium Challenge 3, it exclusively has enemies that cannot be stunned, or sorry, that can be stunned, except for the large leaf mimic praying mantis, which there's only going to be a handful of those the whole level. So, in general, like, stuns can stun everything. So that's not really a factor here about choosing taunts over stuns. And I also really want to highlight here, you've seen I've bolded, especially good against army ant majors, and you probably also saw in this, I put stun reduces flash buff in all caps. The reason why I've included this is because in my opinion, I think Formicarium Challenge 3 is one of the hardest levels in the game. And it's hard because you can prepare for it as much as you want, and you can prepare for it really, really effectively, and you might still lose, because And you could take hours preparing for it and still lose because, well, really, partly because of the scientist is a jerk and he'll just kind of kill you if you do the wrong thing and you weren't ready for that. Or, and he'll just kill a bunch of your ants anyway. But the other thing that makes it really hard is the Army Ant Major's flash buff ability. If you've seen my ant tier list video, you probably know how highly I regard Army Ant Majors, because Army Ant Majors, because of their flash buff ability, they can give themselves and other army ants DPSs around 50 to 55 in that range once they get all the way maxed out on their flash buff. And they give all of their ants that much damage. So if you have a group of like 100 of them and they're all dealing like 50 DPS, that's 5,000 DPS once they get ramped up. And if there are a lot of Army Ant Majors, they can ramp that up really, really quickly, like within just a few seconds. So the fact that that level is really hard because it has Army Ant Majors and they just tear through your lines, this is where stuns are really, really useful. Because stuns not only negate the damage, these gigantic numbers, they not only stop those DPSs from happening, which, as we've already shown, stuns are better at high damages than taunts. And if a single army ant can get themselves up to 50 DPS, that's already higher than a 37.5 DPS. So even if the fight was short, which it probably wouldn't be because there's a lot of ants, they still wouldn't be blocking more than the stuns, because the stuns just do really well when there's a lot of damage coming in. So not only are the stuns better in that regard, but how flash buff works is when an army ant is not attacking, its flash buff power starts dropping, and it drops faster than it rises when they're attacking. I think when they're attacking at level 3, I think they can increase their flash buff damage by it's like 1 point something each time they attack, and they attack once a second. Their flash buff damage starts increasing by 1 DPS every second. So it's pretty fast, but it decreases when they're not attacking by 2 DPS every second. So when you stun them, for those like 4 seconds that you stun them, because you probably have level 3 stuns if you're playing on that level, when you stun them for 4 seconds, that means their DPS not only doesn't rise anymore, and they're also not doing damage, their flash buff bonus to all of the ants starts reducing, and it goes down by, if it's 2 per second and they stun for 4 seconds, it's going to decrease by 8 DPS. And then they'll have to ramp that back up once they're not stunned anymore and keep attacking. So not only are they blocking more damage with their tanking ability, they are also just reducing the damage that these ants can do because of the way flash buff works. So Formicarium Challenge 3, I think there's no question that you take stuns on it, because they're so much better than the taunts on that level. They're just leagues and leagues better than the taunts. Another thing, I won't go into this with too much detail, but because I talked about it in my tier list video, I don't like that the taunts attract damage to themselves in Formicarium Challenge 3, because the front line of Formicarium Challenge 3 consists of leafcutters and black ants. And black ants are really, really bad, and I really prefer that the black ants get killed before the leafcutters, because the leafcutters have higher DPS than the black ants, and they are more costly to bring back than black ants, so I would prefer that there's a chance that they attack the black ants instead of the leafcutter ants, instead of guaranteeing with the taunt that they attack the leafcutters. So that's just another thing I will throw in there. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because I talked about it before. So that's Formicarium Challenge 3. So the Harvest is 3.1. This one only has enemies that can be stunned, except for the large spiny devil bush crickets and the large leaf mimic praying mantises, of which there are not that many in the level. So, like, does it matter really? Like, I think oftentimes the biggest threat in that level is the enemy leafcutter colony, and when they send a bunch of majors down that are really high level, they do a lot of damage. So it would be nice to stun them to slow them down so you can't take as much damage. And again, they do 22 DPS, and as long as they're fighting those majors for more than for more than 20 seconds, or for more than 15 or 16 seconds, which they almost certainly will be, then the stuns are going to be blocking more damage than the taunts. So I think in the harvest, like, I don't know why you wouldn't take the stuns. I think the stuns are significantly better on the harvest than the taunts are, just because of the kinds of enemies you're encountering. So with Frontline, this is 3.2. Frontline has a good mix of both, so I think either are actually good on this level, because the army ants are the main enemies, which we've already talked about. Army ants are really... It's really effective to use stuns against army ants, but every single level you have to fight the big whip spider, and you also have to fight little, like, the medium-sized whip spiders as well, and they're both immune to stuns, and they also have large spiny devil bush crickets and large leaf mimic praying mantises, so there are actually quite a few creatures on that level that can't be stunned. So I think either are fine for this one. I don't really think there's a clear choice which one is better on that one, because again, the main goal is to kill all the army ants, so the stuns are better against them, but you basically always have to kill that whip spider, so you kind of at one point have to kill it anyway, so the taunts are good when you have to fight that. So I think it could go either way. I think that one's fine. So then, Formicarium Challenge 4 has exclusively animals that are creatures that cannot be stunned. So taunts are better for Formicarium Challenge 4. However, how the Formicarium challenges work is once you choose either the taunts or the stuns in the Formicarium, you can't change your selection after that. So we have Formicarium Challenge 3, which is significantly easier if you use the stuns, and Formicarium Challenge 4, which is a little easier if you use the taunts. The reason I say a little easier is because the goal of this Formicarium challenge is not tanking. It's not having to be tanky and fight them. Being tanky helps, but the main priority is to deal as much damage to all of the hybrid creatures as fast as possible. So, because of that, I don't think the leafcutter ants are that impactful of which choice you choose for Formicarium Challenge 4, because it's about damage, and the things that do the leafcutter majors both do exactly the same amount of DPS, and it's high, so it's good to have them there, but it doesn't really matter about their special abilities that much. And like, you want to prioritize having rapid fire wood ants so they can kill the hybrids quickly, because they're really good at it. And you're going to want to have lots of fire ants and you probably want to do vigorous because they do more damage. So because those two are more important, I don't think it really matters which one you choose in Formicarium Challenge 4, at least when it comes to the majors. And I would highly recommend that you take stun, because if you're going to take rapid fire wood ants into Formicarium Challenge 3, you're going to need stun, because it's really hard to beat that level with rapid fire. It's much easier with mortar, but I've not played Formicarium Challenge 4 with mortars, but everybody I've talked to who has said that Formicarium Challenge 4 is almost impossible. Like, they almost didn't win on easy difficulty. And I had rapid fire wood ants, and I beat Formicarium Challenge 4 on insane difficulty on my second try. So, and I had stuns. So I don't think it really mattered in that regard, and I think the stuns were necessary in Formicarium Challenge 3, because I was kind of handicapping myself taking rapid fire, because I couldn't do the splash damage to all of those big groups of ants. But it ended up being the right decision, because Formicarium Challenge 4 is evidently really hard without rapid fire. So in that regard, like, yeah, Formicarium Challenge 4 is better to have taunts, but because you can't change your option, I think, and stuns are way better on Formicarium Challenge 3 than taunts are better on Formicarium Challenge 4, that I think you should just take stuns the whole time. So you're gonna have stuns in Formicarium Challenge 4 anyway. You technically don't have to, but like, I think that's probably the most effective way to play it, I would say. So then those were all of the story levels. I will talk about adventure because I think, you know, it's a new level, and I think it's important because it's all leafcutter level, and you can choose which majors you have. Adventure taunts are much better. There's so many uber creatures and really powerful big creatures that you can't stun in adventure that you need to have this. You need to have the taunts on adventure. The stuns just don't do enough for what you need to do in that game mode, because you're also not fighting groups of ants all that often, and you fight lots of ubers and you can't stun an uber, so the taunts are better for adventure. Oh, something else I just realized I forgot. The harvest and the harvest I forgot to add it. You also, since the adventure update, I forgot to put this in because adventure is new and like it came out like a week ago as of this recording. The harvest has the large spiny devil bush crickets, large leaf mimic praying mantises, and the large velvet worms. All three of those cannot be stunned. So I forgot to say that. I apologize. So technically there are 3 creatures in this level. Still not many, but technically there are 3 creatures in that level. And then talking about free play, I think free play just depends on how you do it. Because like if you're fighting ant colonies and that's your primary things that you're going up against, the stuns are better because you can stun every single ant in the game. So having stuns is more useful if you're fighting ant colonies, but if you're doing like the waves and you're getting lots of ubers, it might be better to have taunts so you can deal with those ubers better. I don't know. I don't play free play that much, so I don't know exactly, but just from what people have told me, that seems to be the way to do that. And if you do it with no ant colonies or no waves, then I mean, I think either would probably be fine. Probably the stuns, because you can stun most enemies in the game, and that's probably more useful, but I don't know. I don't think it really matters that much. So free play, it depends. That's why I'm not saying one way or the other which way it would go. So if we tally up which of these is better to have stuns and which is better to have taunts, if we're just doing story levels, there's 4. So Formicarium Challenge 3, stuns are better. The Harvest, stuns are better. Frontline, I think either are fine, so I would call that a tie. And then Formicarium Challenge 4, taunts are better because you can't stun anything. So that means there are 2 levels where stuns are better, 1 level where taunts are better, and 1 where they're pretty equal. And I would argue that because it's so much more important for Formicarium Challenge 3 to have stuns, by how the Formicarium challenges work, you will have stuns in Formicarium Challenge 4. So I think even though taunts are useful all of the time, and stuns are only useful sometimes, stuns are useful like 90% of the time, and because they're so much better than taunts at blocking damage, I don't really see a competition. I will fully admit all of these like level explanations are my opinion, so you can technically disagree with them. But like I think the hard math that we've done is it like in all the tables that I just showed, and the fact that there's more than double the number of stunnable creatures in the game than there are not stunnable creatures in the game. I just think that stuns are just, I don't think. Mathematically, stuns are better than taunts, without a doubt. Maybe if you have preferences in your playstyle or something, that could change, and maybe you disagree with me with these levels. But mathematically, stuns are better than taunts, and I don't think there's any refuting of that. Maybe they will get rebalanced in the future, but at least for now, that's pretty set. Mathematically, stuns are better than taunts. If I missed something or did something wrong, please let me know in the comments. I tried to proofread this, but I am one person, so I miss things sometimes, so that would be appreciated if you could let me know that. So, go ahead and milk that subscribe button, ring that cowbell, and utterly smash that like button, and then tip your cow into the comments. And finally, thank you all for watching, and have a great, great life, everyone.